Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. Today, in the series of explaining the cybersecurity industry, I'm going to cover a new topic on endpoint security landscape. So, as always, I'll start with the definition. We'll talk about how big the market is. We'll talk about some history. We'll focus on use cases. We'll learn how it works, the current landscape of endpoint security technology, and where the future is. With that, let's get started. So, as per Forrester, the endpoint security landscape is all about the strategies, practices, and software products used to prevent malware, dangerous or malicious actions, data breaches, and all other cyber attacks that might impact an enterprise's endpoint. Now, the key terms you have to remember in this entire landscape is EPP, endpoint protection, EDR, endpoint detection and response, and XDR. These three terminologies are very popular right now. However, EPP is a common term. I still remember my old days, decades back, when antivirus um, or anti-malware, anti-spyware, those terminologies were more common. But all these terms eventually evolved and essentially consolidated into EPP, endpoint protection platforms. And then if I talk about history, okay, in 1987, Andreas Leuning and Kai Fig, they formed a company called G-Data Software and released their first antivirus product for the Atari ST platform. In 1987, in US, John McAfee founded the McAfee Company, which was part of Intel Security until recently. And in later in that year, in 87, he released the first version of antivirus software called VirusScan. Symantec was founded by Gary Hendricks in 1982, and they launched the first Symantec antivirus for Macintosh. And since then, multiple companies have come, and some of them have gone to dust already in the last few decades. So this is a very big market, uh, which still has at least 30 to 50 players that I know about. Okay, so and why that market is big is because the number of endpoints is huge. Okay, and endpoint essentially includes anything like your laptop, desktop, your mobile phone, your tablets. Everything is an endpoint. So this market is the endpoint security market is expected to reach $25.7 billion by 2023, and in 2022 it was around $12.46 billion, and the market is exhibiting a CAGR growth of 9.5% during this period of 2023 to 2020 to 2030. Okay, so the market is pretty huge. Okay, now if I have to talk about the use cases that are popularly used by enterprises, these, and I'm covering both use cases for an EPP and EDR. Uh, uh, so it involves prevention specific use cases like malware prevention, exploit prevention, secure configuration, browser security, application control, app isolation, behavior analytics, remediation and rapid response, etc. And in last few years, EPP products are evolving into XDR platforms, which essentially means collecting telemetry from various sources beyond just the endpoint. Okay, so uh, in this product has been evolving. Okay, now two things that are I found new. Personally, I had no exposure to these things. That browser security becoming part of endpoint protection. So essentially, browser security are products that can detect and block web-borne threats and risks that attempt to attack the browser itself or exploit it as an attack vector. So these used to exist as a separate product. Eventually, they become part of the endpoint product. Okay, my personal experience has been on EPP and EDR. EDR more because one of the companies that I worked with in the past, they acquired a company in 2012. It was a dedicated EDR product. Back in those days, endpoint EPP and EDR were different products. So you would install two agents. Now it's same agent that does both the functionalities. Okay, in most of the cases. Now let's look at how the technology works. Okay, so essentially the endpoint security technology has two components: the server and the client. and it also has threat intelligence. So the server is either deployed as an on-prem or a SaaS option. SaaS is getting more popular because of the obvious advantages of not maintaining the infrastructure for the server part. On-prem options do exist, and it's very popular in enterprises that don't want the OEMs, the product makers, to manage the infrastructure. So, but SaaS is more popular. In fact, some of the companies that are really big on endpoint are SaaS-based platforms. Okay, so that was the server component. On the endpoint, that gets the endpoint component gets deployed as an agent or as a service. It will get deployed on workstations, servers, mobile operating systems, etc. So all these companies that are in the EPP domain typically would have a capability to run as an agent in these platforms. Okay, now once you have your setup, so let's say you as an end user of this product, you buy a license, although of course there are free versions available, but I prefer commercial because when there is money, more innovation is done. Okay, now once you get your license activated, you get a tenant if it's a SaaS product, or you can download the installer and install the license in a server of your choice in case you're going with the on-prem version. Okay, so I'm going to stick to the SaaS version because that's more popular now. So SaaS version based platform, what you get is you get a console, and on that console you have the options to create installers for various endpoints. So let's say you choose that I want to install or I want to have endpoint security for my Windows. So you get an option where you would create configuration profile for this installer. So example, an MSI file which will have certain capabilities. So you can enable, disable configuration based on the product capabilities. So example, things like enable encryption, enable hardening, disable certain ports, enable malware protection, enable ransomware specific monitoring. All those configurations can be enabled, and then you push these agents using a enterprise software deployment product like Microsoft SCCM, GPO, etc. And then the agent gets activated. Now, once the agent is activated, it has both the prevention and data collection profile. Again, I'm assuming in this context that EPP and EDR capabilities are provided by the same product. So the prevention mode is activated, and again, remember those use cases of malware prevention, exploit prevention, etc. that we talked about in the beginning. Okay. Then on the EDR side, the agent is collecting data, and that data typically would include file activity data, process activity data. So example, somebody launching a browser, going to a particular website, maybe downloading a file. What is that file doing? Let's say you download a PDF, it gets opened in Acrobat or some other PDF reader. So multiple processes will be created in this, and the endpoint agent keeps track of all these things. Okay, so it also monitors registry changes, network activity, etc. Again, depends on the operating system. Okay, now what the platform also enables is behavior analytics. So essentially it is comparing the activity of this specific endpoint on which this agent is deployed to its historical activity. So which means the endpoint builds a baseline, or the product builds a baseline, and then also compares the activity or the files that it is seeing, essentially the hashes, the unique hashes that it is seeing across the wider deployment. So example, let's say you have an infrastructure that has 10,000 endpoints. The agent will monitor what's happening on every particular machine to its past behavior, and also activity on one machine compared to the activity with other machines. And that, because that telemetry, all that activity telemetry is going to the SaaS product or the central server, it is easy to do analytics on it. Okay, so example, hey, this endpoint is trying to connect to a domain which is not known to anyone, and this is the only machine that's trying to do it. Maybe it's doing it only on weekend. Okay, and the file that it has downloaded, it is not a trusted file. It is not signed by a popular product vendor, and it is trying to launch some PowerShell activity, PowerShell based scripts, etc. So those things are analyzed, and that's where the UEBA capability works. Okay. Now let's say there's an issue that's detected. Uh, there would be an alert that can be sent to an SIM, or if there is a prevention capability that can instantly block bad behavior. Example, in case of ransomware, this is very common, where ransomware exhibits a common trait where it tries to rename or read thousands of files in few seconds. So though that activity can be prevented, an alert can be sent to a SIM or a SOAR or native in the native console of the EPP EDR product. What I've realized is most of the EPP EDR product don't have a good case management workflows, so they typically integrate with SIM SOAR platforms. Okay, in certain cases, automatic response, which is typically limited maybe to a one step or two, can be activated. Things like, hey, isolate this endpoint if this kind of activity is seen. With what that means is the endpoint or the victim machine can only talk to the endpoint protection server, so that an analyst can take a live terminal, do some analysis, and carry out some action like formatting system. Okay, uh, so that kind of response can be executed. Okay, so that's how typically the endpoint protection or endpoint EDR platforms work. Okay, now let's talk about the current landscape. So as I've seen the evolution, there are dedicated endpoint protection vendors, EDR vendors. As I said, the industry started with dedicated or separate EPP EDR products, and now the agents are one. And so these companies are, how they are making their platforms is that they're not just covering the standard endpoint that are used by end users. There are companies that provide the enterprise versions and the home versions for students and home users, and then there are companies who are only focused on enterprises, but they provide coverage in terms of container platforms, cloud infrastructure systems, and they're trying to collect more telemetry. So they are trying to become XDR platforms by collecting more telemetry that can help them to detect and respond faster to the enterprise threats. Okay, the reason EPP market is also very big is because endpoint is where the most critical information is. Okay, and it also travels a lot. So my system, it is, I work from it when I'm at home or when I'm traveling. So my network are always switching, and most of the times the networks on which I'm connected might not be secure. Okay, so endpoints are the most targeted systems. Okay, now so there is a set of dedicated endpoint vendors, and then there is a set of larger platform vendors. So the most common platform vendors, and I recommend looking at some of the reports from Gartner, Forrester. They come up with these reports on EDR, EPP, uh, and also MITRE, Ingenuity Evaluations, uh, and so you to compare various platforms. So most of the large vendors like Microsoft, Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, etc., they are trying to make a common platform for uh, enterprise-wide threat detection and response, whereas for smaller companies, the endpoint is still a dedicated product, only having specific focus on endpoint security. And then there are standard or standalone companies that focus on a particular use case like browser security. So the market itself, just like overall cybersecurity is fragmented, within endpoint the market is also very fragmented. Okay, now in terms of future, I believe consolidation, platformization is the future, at least for large companies. So the endpoint, the large vendors at least are making movement into direction. We're trying to combine the front ends, the back ends of various threat detection and response platform, making it very easy for large corporates to manage and respond to attacks on thousands of uh, enterprise systems. Okay, and that's very common. So as large enterprises adopt more digital journey, the system that are connected to internet will definitely increase, which means they need to respond faster, they need to look at more data in a shorter span of time, and that's where consolidation will help. Okay, I'm also expecting co-pilots, already most of the vendors have started to announce co-pilots this year after generative AI uh, announcements. RSA conference this year had some press announcements and press releases, but I think most of this stuff will start getting released from this quarter onwards with at least the large providers. Some of them in beta, some of them in the final versions, but it's coming. And prompt engineering is the new skill that cybersecurity analysts will have to build. So instead of writing rules, use cases, they will focus on writing good prompts. Okay. With that, thank you so much. If you like the podcast, please share with your friends. If you want to suggest a topic, please reach out. I'll see you next time.